August 2nd, 1882. The Pecos County Commissioner's Court in Fort Stockton, Texas, made a decision that would become frontier legend. They appointed a 57-year-old saloonkeeper with zero legal training, multiple killings in his past, and a reputation for cutting down trees that didn't belong to him as Justice of the Peace for Precinct Number 6. His courtroom would be his saloon. His gavel would be a Smith & Wesson revolver. His law book would be the 1879 edition of the Revised Statutes of Texas. And when the legislature sent him updated editions every 2 years, he burned them. For the next 21 years, Roy Bean dispensed what he called justice from behind a bar in the most remote corner of Texas, 200 miles from the nearest legitimate court. This is the story of the man who proclaimed himself the only law west of the Pecos, and somehow got away with it. Fantley Roy Bean, Jr. was born around 1825 in Mason County, Kentucky, into grinding poverty. The family was so poor that at 16, Bean left home on a flatboat heading to New Orleans, hoping to find work that paid actual money. After getting into unspecified trouble in New Orleans, he fled to San Antonio to join his older brother Sam. The pattern of Bean's early life was straightforward: arrive somewhere, cause problems, leave before consequences arrived. In 1848, he and Sam established a trading post in Chihuahua, Mexico. Bean killed a local man and fled to San Diego, California, where his brother Joshua lived. California offered Bean his first brush with frontier mythology. On February the 24th, 1852, he participated in a duel on horseback with a Scotsman named Collins over, according to various accounts, the affections of local women. Collins took a bullet in his right arm. Both men were arrested for assault with intent to murder. Bean was convicted and jailed, but according to California folklore, sympathetic local girls smuggled tools to him in tamales. He allegedly dug his way out and escaped. Whether this romantic tale is true or embellished remains unclear, but Bean never denied it. By the 1860s, Bean had returned to Texas and married Maria Anastasia Virginia Chavez, a descendant of Canary Islanders. They had 4 children together. Bean worked various jobs in San Antonio, operating a saloon, hauling freight, and running a dairy. The area where he lived became known as Beanville. He tried selling firewood, but failed after repeatedly cutting down trees belonging to other people. When confronted, Bean defended himself by claiming he thought they were his trees, then added that it was the last time he'd let a cow drink from the creek before milking her. The excuse made no logical sense, which was perfectly consistent with Bean's approach to everything. In 1882, Bean heard about opportunities along the Southern Pacific Railroad being constructed through the desolate Trans-Pecos region of West Texas. The construction camps attracted what one Texas Ranger captain described as the worst collection of roughs, gamblers, robbers, and pickpockets he'd ever encountered. The nearest courthouse sat 200 miles away at Fort Stockton, meaning minor offenses went completely unpunished. Bean saw opportunity. He loaded his belongings onto a wagon and headed to a railroad camp called Vinegaroon. Bean set up a tent saloon on railroad property and immediately established himself through characteristically blunt methods. His first judicial act, performed before he even had official appointment, was shooting up the saloon of a Jewish competitor. When it became known that authorities needed a justice of the peace for the area, Bean volunteered. On August 2, 1882, the commissioners made it official. Bean became the only legal authority in a region larger than some eastern states. His approach to law was selective and creative. Bean owned exactly one law book, the 1879 Revised Statutes of Texas. When the legislature sent updated editions reflecting new laws passed every 2 years, Bean used them as kindling. He announced he preferred the old book and liked those laws better. His courtroom was his saloon, initially a tent and later a wooden structure. He selected juries from his best bar customers, who were expected to purchase drinks during every court recess. He didn't allow hung juries or appeals. His rulings were final because he said they were. The cases that came before Bean produced verdicts that mixed frontier pragmatism with outright theft. When a Southern Pacific Railroad worker fell from a high bridge over the Pecos River and died, Bean was called to perform the inquest. He examined the body, which carried a pistol and $40 in cash. Bean ruled the death accidental, then fined the corpse $20 for carrying a concealed weapon and pocketed another $20 in combined burial fees and court costs. The dead man's $40 exactly covered Bean's invented charges. In another case, an Irishman named Paddy O'Rourke shot and killed a Chinese laborer. During the trial, 200 angry Irishmen surrounded the saloon, threatening to lynch Bean if O'Rourke wasn't freed. Bean consulted his law book, then announced his ruling. The statute defined homicide as the killing of a human being, he explained. After thorough examination, he could find no law against killing a Chinese person. Case dismissed. The legal reasoning was racist nonsense, but it kept Bean alive, which was his primary concern. When a train passenger once paid for a beer with a $20 gold piece, Bean refused to give change. The stranger protested. Bean immediately fined him $19.95 for contempt of court and threatened to double the fine if another word was spoken. The stranger left on the next train. Although only district courts could legally grant divorces in Texas, Bean performed them anyway, charging $10 per divorce and pocketing the fee. His business model was straightforward. If he could charge for it, he did. Bean's obsession with British actress Lily Langtry defined much of his later life. He named his saloon the Jersey Lily after her, misspelling her first name and using Jersey as reference to the island where she was born. He hung her portrait prominently in the saloon and wrote her letters proclaiming his admiration. He even told her the town of Langtry, Texas, was named in her honor. This was a lie. The town had been named after a railroad construction foreman. Lily Langtry never visited during Bean's lifetime, arriving in 1904, 1 year after his death. When she finally came, the town treated her like royalty, partly out of respect for Bean's memory. Bean's most famous exploit involved staging an illegal prize fight. In February 1896, heavyweight boxers Bob Fitzsimmons and Peter Mayer were scheduled to fight. But both Texas and Mexico had outlawed boxing. Bean saw opportunity. He sold tickets and beer, then escorted the entire crowd across a pontoon bridge to a sandbar in the middle of the Rio Grande, technically outside both jurisdictions. Texas Rangers watched from the Texas side, satisfied they had no legal authority over the middle of the river. The fight lasted 95 seconds. Fitzsimmons knocked out Maher in the first round. But Bean sold hundreds of beers at $1 each, an exorbitant price, and his name went worldwide in newspaper coverage. The clever judge who made the impossible fight possible had become international news. Bean also kept a large beer-drinking black bear that wandered freely through the saloon and courthouse, intimidating defendants and amusing customers. The bear slept at the foot of Bean's bed and served as unofficial bailiff during court proceedings. Train passengers stopping at Langtry often bought beers specifically to feed the bear, generating additional revenue for Bean's operation. Despite his reputation as a hanging judge who supposedly said hang them first and try them later, Bean never actually hanged anyone during his entire career as justice of the peace. He occasionally staged fake hangings to frighten outlaws into reform, but no executions occurred under his authority. The hanging judge reputation likely came from confusion with Judge Isaac Parker of Fort Smith, Arkansas, who genuinely did sentence around 160 people to death. Roy Bean died on March 19, 1903, in his saloon from what records describe as excess of liquor. He was 78 years old. He'd spent the last 2 decades of his life as a frontier celebrity, holding court in his combination saloon and courthouse, dispensing bizarre justice, pocketing fines, and building a legend that outlived him by generations. He was buried in Del Rio, Texas. Bean's legacy is complicated. He was corrupt, racist, violent, and made up legal rulings to suit his financial interests. He represents everything problematic about frontier justice, where one-armed man could declare himself the law and enforce his will through intimidation. Yet he also filled a genuine vacuum. In a region 200 miles from the nearest legitimate court, Bean provided some structure, however flawed, to communities that otherwise had none. His rulings might have been bizarre, but they were at least rulings. Order of any kind beat complete chaos. The phrase law west of the Pecos carried specific meaning in the 1880s. An older saying warned that west of the Pecos there was no law, and west of El Paso there was no God. Bean at least provided the first part. Whether that law was fair, legal, or even coherent mattered less than the fact that it existed and was backed by a man willing to use force to maintain it. Bean never received formal legal training. He never passed a bar examination. He never studied jurisprudence or constitutional law. He simply appointed himself the authority because no one else was there to object. For 21 years, that was enough. The only law west of the Pecos was whatever Roy Bean said it was, delivered from behind a bar with a revolver as gavel and a bear as bailiff.